Master Kethvar had traveled across 3 star systems to reach the Galactic Combat Academy, and he wasn't impressed by what he saw. The massive Valthek warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his 4 muscular arms flexing as he surveyed the training ground. His people had conquered 17 worlds through pure martial skill, and their crystalline bone structure made them nearly unbreakable in combat. The Academy's mixed lighting system cast rainbow reflections off his natural armor as he walked through the facility. The other students immediately noticed his presence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as the alien cadets turned to stare at the legendary fighter. Kethvar had defeated champions from dozens of species, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. The reptilian Scrathy students unconsciously backed away from his path, their scaled skin rippling with nervous energy. Even the insectoid Nephrim, usually confident in their own combat abilities, seemed smaller in his shadow. But it was the human section that caught his attention. Kethvar had heard stories about Earth species during his journey here, weak, soft creatures with no natural weapons or armor. They had somehow convinced the Galactic Council to accept them into the Academy program, though most aliens considered it a waste of resources. Humans were better suited for simple labor or basic technical work, not the warrior arts. In the far corner of the training area, Lihana was going through her daily practice routine. The 20-year-old Korean girl moved through basic defensive forms with careful precision, her black hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard Academy training uniform, which seemed too large for her small frame. At barely 5 feet tall, she looked fragile compared to the other species around her. Kethvar watched her movements with growing amusement. Her footwork was textbook perfect, but there was no power behind her strikes. Her defensive postures looked rigid and mechanical, like someone who had only learned from instructional videos. This was exactly what he expected from a human warrior. Technical knowledge without any real understanding of combat flow. The training ground gradually fell silent as other students noticed where Kethvar was looking. Word spread quickly through the mixed group of aliens that the famous Valthek master was about to make an example of someone. The gaseous vortals floated closer, their energy forms pulsing with excitement. This was the kind of demonstration that Academy instructors talked about for years afterward. "You there, human?" Kethvar's voice carried easily across the large space. His vocal cords were designed for battlefield communication, and even his normal speaking voice had an intimidating quality. "Face me in combat. Let us demonstrate the natural order between our species." Hana stopped her practice routine immediately, her hands dropping to her sides as she turned toward the source of the voice. Her face went pale as she realized that the massive alien warrior was speaking directly to her. Around the training ground, dozens of alien students began moving closer to form a loose circle. Some pulled out recording devices to capture what was about to happen. I'm just a beginner," Hana said, her voice barely loud enough to carry across the space. She looked around nervously at all the faces watching her, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and she seemed to shrink even smaller under Kethvar's predatory gaze. But despite her obvious fear, she took a step forward. Then another. The Academy's combat protocols required that challenges be accepted or formally declined, and declining would mean immediate expulsion from the program. Hana had worked too hard to get here to throw it away now, even if it meant facing a warrior who could probably break her in half without effort. Kethvar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. This was going to be even easier than he had expected. The human girl looked ready to faint just from being challenged. When they actually began fighting, she would probably surrender after the first exchange. It would be a perfect demonstration of why humans didn't belong in warrior academies. The other students continued gathering around the designated combat area, their excitement building as they prepared to witness what would surely be a memorable lesson in biological hierarchy. The combat circle activated with a soft blue glow, marking the official boundaries of the duel. Academy protocol required a formal opening ceremony, even for what everyone expected to be a completely one-sided fight. The referee, a tall Zenthari with silver skin, gestured for both fighters to take their positions. Kethvar stepped into the circle with the confidence of someone who had never lost a formal duel. His forearms hung loosely at his sides, but every muscle in his massive frame was coiled and ready. Hana entered the circle much more hesitantly. She bowed respectfully toward Kethavar, following the traditional greeting customs she had learned in her academy classes. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and several students in the crowd whispered to each other about how terrified she looked. The betting pools that had quickly formed among the alien students were heavily favoring Kethavar, with some offering odds as high as 50-1 against the human girl. When the referee signaled the start of combat, Kethavar didn't waste any time with testing moves or cautious probing. He launched himself forward with the devastating opening combination that had made him famous across multiple star systems. His forearms moved in perfect coordination, creating a whirlwind of strikes that came from impossible angles. The first punch aimed for Hana's head, while his second arm swept low at her legs. Simultaneously, his third arm struck toward her midsection, as his fourth prepared a follow-up that would end the fight immediately. This was the technique that had crushed the champion of Xerion Prime in less than 10 seconds. It had broken through the legendary defenses of the Karathi warrior monks. No opponent had ever survived the full sequence without being knocked unconscious, or worse. Kethavar had perfected this combination over decades of warfare, and it represented everything his species had learned about overwhelming force and tactical superiority. But something unexpected happened. Hana moved. It wasn't the panicked scrambling that everyone expected to see. Instead, she stepped backward at exactly the right angle, letting Kethavar's first punch whistle past her face by mere inches. Her movement looked clumsy at first, like she had simply stumbled away from the attack. But then she continued moving, avoiding the leg sweep with another seemingly accidental step. The crowd began murmuring in confusion as Hana kept moving, somehow staying just ahead of Kethavar's devastating combination. By the time his fourth strike came around, Hana was completely out of range. Kethavar found himself punching empty air, his perfectly coordinated attack sequence broken for the first time in his career. He stared at the small human girl in genuine surprise, trying to understand what had just happened. Had she really avoided his opening assault, or had he simply miscalculated the distance? Hana straightened up from her awkward-looking defensive posture, brushing a strand of hair from her face. To the watching crowd, it looked like she had gotten incredibly lucky. But Kethavar noticed something else in her dark eyes now. The terrified expression was still there, but underneath it was something that hadn't been present before. She was watching him, studying him. Kethavar reset his stance and attacked again, this time with a different combination. He varied his timing and angles, using techniques from 3 different Valthek fighting schools. Surely the human couldn't get lucky twice in a row. But again, Hana moved at just the right moments. Her movement still looked unpolished and desperate, but she was staying alive when she should have been unconscious on the ground. As the minutes passed, something remarkable began to happen. Hana's defensive movements became smoother. Her footwork grew more confident. What had started as wild stumbling began to look like actual combat technique. She was learning, adapting to Kethavar's fighting style in real time. Each exchange taught her something new about his patterns and preferences. Kethavar's confidence began to waver for the first time in decades. This wasn't how these demonstrations were supposed to go. The human should have been defeated immediately, not growing stronger as the fight continued. He increased his aggression, throwing faster combinations with more power behind each strike. But Hana kept adapting, her movements becoming more precise with each passing moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm despite the intense combat happening around her. "Interesting," she murmured, stepping smoothly away from what should have been an unpredictable attack. "Your third arm always telegraphs when you're about to use the fourth." Kethavar's eyes widened in shock. In over 30 years of combat, no opponent had ever analyzed his technique while fighting him. The observation was completely accurate too. He did have a small tell when preparing his fourth arm for surprise strikes. But how had she noticed it so quickly? The crowd fell completely silent. Something was happening here that none of them understood. The terrified human girl was not only surviving against a legendary warrior, she was studying him like a scientist, examining a specimen. When Kethavar escalated to potentially lethal force, expecting her to surrender rather than risk serious injury. Hana did something that shocked everyone present. Instead of backing down, she shifted into an offensive stance that none of the alien students recognized. The transformation happened so quickly that most observers couldn't process what they were seeing. One moment, Hana was the same nervous human girl who had been barely surviving Kethvar's attacks. The next moment, she moved like liquid lightning. Her entire body language changed in the span of a heartbeat. The trembling hands became steady. The uncertain footwork turned into fluid motion. Even her facial expression shifted from fearful to completely focused. Kethvar threw his next combination with full force, expecting to finally connect with the elusive human. Instead, his strikes met empty air as Hana seemed to dance around his attacks without effort. But this wasn't the desperate dodging from before. These movements were calculated, precise, and impossibly fast. She was no longer reacting to his attacks after they began. She was anticipating them before he even committed to the motion. The crowd of alien students pressed closer to the combat circle, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The reptilian Scrati warriors, who prided themselves on their own speed and agility, watched in stunned silence as the human girl moved faster than their enhanced reflexes could follow. The insectoid Nephrim, with their compound eyes that could track multiple objects simultaneously, found themselves losing sight of Hana's movements completely. Kethvar began to panic. Nothing in his decades of combat experience had prepared him for an opponent like this. He increased his attack speed using every technique he had learned across multiple worlds, but Hana wasn't just avoiding his strikes anymore, she was countering them. Each time he attacked, she would slip past his defenses and land a precise strike of her own. Her hits weren't particularly powerful, but they were perfectly placed to disrupt his balance and timing. The Valthek warrior realized with growing horror that the human was systematically dismantling his fighting style. She would block one of his arms while simultaneously striking the nerve cluster that controlled another. She would step inside his reach at exactly the right moment to make his longer arms useless. Every counterattack she made taught her something new about his body, mechanics and defensive patterns. "This is impossible," Kethvar muttered, breathing heavily as he reset his stance. "Humans don't move like this. Humans can't move like this." Hana smiled for the first time since the fight began. It wasn't a friendly expression. "You're right. Normal humans can't." Desperation drove Kethvar to attempt something he had never used in a training environment. The Void Render was the ultimate technique of his species, a devastating attack sequence that combined all four arms in a spiral pattern that created a literal whirlwind of destruction. It was designed to break through any defense and end fights instantly. The technique was so dangerous that it was normally reserved for life-or-death combat situations. He gathered all his remaining strength and launched into the complex sequence. His forearms began moving in the intricate pattern that had taken him years to master. The air around him actually began to vibrate from the speed and power of his movements. This was the attack that had once brought down an entire building. During the siege of Karani Station, Hana watched the beginning of the sequence with interest rather than fear. As Kethvar's arms began their deadly spiral, she did something that defied every law of physics the watching aliens understood. Instead of trying to escape or block the attack, she stepped forward into it. Her movements matched his spiral pattern perfectly, but in reverse. She was using his own momentum against him, redirecting the massive kinetic energy he was generating. The result was spectacular. Kethvar, who had put everything he had into the Void Render, found himself spinning out of control as his own technique was turned against him. Hana's reversal sent him flying across the combat circle like he weighed nothing at all. The 8-foot warrior crashed into the arena's energy barrier with enough force to make the entire structure shake. The barrier held but barely, its blue glow flickering as it absorbed the tremendous impact. Complete silence filled the training ground. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the gaseous vortals had stopped their constant floating motion, their energy, forms frozen in shock. What they had just witnessed should have been impossible. A human, the weakest species in the known galaxy, had not only defeated a Valthek master, but had done it using his own ultimate technique against him. Hana walked calmly to the center of the combat circle, her breathing completely normal despite the intense fight that had just ended. She looked around at all the staring faces, taking in their expressions of disbelief and fear. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the training ground. "I'm sorry for the deception," she said, her tone completely different from the stammering girl who had entered the circle. "My name is Lee Hanna, designation Apex 7. I'm what humanity created when we realized we were considered the galaxy's weakest species." The alien students began backing away from the combat circle, instinctively. They had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural order of the galaxy. A human who could match their greatest warriors wasn't just unexpected, it was terrifying. The training ground slowly emptied. As alien students dispersed, their conversations filled with hushed whispers and confused speculation. Most of them had recorded the fight on their personal devices, but even watching the footage back, they struggled to understand what they had witnessed. The reptilian Scrathi gathered in small groups, their scales still rippling with nervous energy. The insectoid Nephrim clicked their mandibles anxiously as they tried to process the implications of what had just happened. Kethvar remained on the ground for several minutes, his massive frame slumped against the energy barrier where he had crashed. His crystalline exoskeleton had several hairline cracks from the impact, something that should have been impossible given the natural durability of his species. More than his physical injuries, though, his pride was completely shattered. In over 3 decades of combat, he had never been defeated so decisively. The fact that his conqueror was a member of the species he considered weakest in the galaxy made the defeat even more difficult to accept. Eventually, he managed to pull himself to his feet, his forearms working together to support his weight as he stood. The training ground had mostly cleared out by then, with only a few stragglers remaining to whisper among themselves about what they had seen. Hana was sitting quietly on one of the benches near the combat circle, apparently unbothered by the monumental fight that had just ended. She was drinking water from a standard academy bottle and looked like any other student taking a break from training. Kethvar approached her slowly, each step requiring considerable effort due to his injuries. His pride told him to leave immediately, to retreat to his quarters, and pretend this humiliation had never happened. But his curiosity was stronger than his wounded ego. He needed answers. He needed to understand what had just occurred and what it meant for everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. "What are you?" he asked when he reached her bench. His voice was quieter than usual, lacking the booming confidence that had characterized his earlier challenge. Hana looked up from her water bottle, studying his battered appearance with what might have been sympathy. She gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench, silently inviting him to sit down. Kethvar hesitated for a moment, then accepted the offer. His massive frame made the bench creak under his weight, but it held. "That's a complicated question," Hana said, her tone much gentler than it had been during their fight. "The simple answer is that I'm human, just like the records say, but the complete answer is much more complex." She took another sip of water before continuing. "The Apex project began about 50 years ago, shortly after humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council. We quickly realized that every other species in the galaxy viewed us as inferior, physically weak, slow to adapt with no natural weapons or defenses. Most aliens saw us as suitable only for basic labor or simple technical work." Kethvar nodded slowly. This matched his own understanding of human capabilities, or what he had thought were human capabilities. "Our leaders had a choice," Hana continued. "We could accept our place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy, or we could find a way to change the game entirely. While other species evolved naturally over millions of years to become apex predators, we chose a different path. We decided to enhance ourselves through science, technology, and intensive training." She stood up from the bench and walked a few steps away, her movement still carrying that fluid grace that had been so devastating in combat. "I'm designed to learn, counter, and overcome any threat I encounter. My reflexes, processing speed, and physical capabilities have all been enhanced far beyond normal human limits. But more importantly, My mind has been trained to analyze and adapt to any fighting style or technique. Kethvar felt a chill run through his damaged exoskeleton as the implications began to sink in. You're saying that humans have been hiding their true capabilities this entire time? Not hiding, Hana corrected. Preparing. We exist throughout human space, integrated into normal society, but ready to act when needed. Most of us work regular jobs, attend schools, live apparently ordinary lives. The galaxy thinks we're weak because we choose to appear that way. The Valthek warrior's mind raced as he tried to process this information. How many of you are there? Hana's expression became unreadable. Enough. Each of us is trained to counter specific threats. Some are designed to face energy-based attackers like the luminals. Others specialize in dealing with hive mind species or technologically advanced civilizations. I was created specifically to match physically superior warriors like yourself. She returned to the bench and sat down again, her voice becoming even more serious. Humanity learned something important during our first years in galactic society. Survival doesn't just require strength or speed or natural weapons. It requires intelligence, careful planning, and the willingness to exceed whatever limitations others try to place on you. Kethvar realized with growing horror that he hadn't simply lost a training exercise to a particularly talented student. He had encountered something far more significant. He had glimpsed humanity's true potential, and it was terrifying. If humans could create individuals capable of matching the galaxy's greatest warriors, what else were they capable of? What other surprises were they hiding throughout their space? Why are you telling me this? He asked. Hana smiled again, but this time it was genuinely warm rather than coldly confident. Because understanding is the first step toward respect, and respect is what humanity has been working toward all along. The first explosions shook the academy just as Kethvar was beginning to process what Hana had told him about humanity's hidden capabilities. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the facility, their harsh red lights casting ominous shadows across the training grounds. The academy's defensive shields flickered and sparked as they absorbed the initial bombardment. From space, within seconds, the main communication system crackled to life with an urgent announcement. All students and faculty to emergency positions. The Academy is under attack by Nexari Imperial forces. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Kethvar knew about the Nexari Empire from military briefings. They were a serpentine species that had been expanding aggressively across the Outer Rim territories for the past decade. Their plasma-based weapons technology made them particularly dangerous, and their military doctrine focused on overwhelming force applied quickly to crush resistance before it could organize. The fact that they were attacking the Galactic Combat Academy meant this was likely part of a much larger offensive. Through the Academy's transparent walls, both Kethvar and Hana could see the sleek, snake-like Nexari assault ships descending from orbit. Their hulls gleamed with an oily, iridescent quality that made them difficult to track visually. Plasma bolts began raining down on the Academy's outer defenses, each impact sending shockwaves through the ground. Their targeting. The human dormitories first, Hana observed, her voice completely calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Standard Nexari doctrine. Eliminate the weakest opponents first to prevent them from becoming a liability to the stronger defenders. Other students were running in panic through the corridors, many of them heading for the emergency shelters. Deep underground, the reptilian Skrathi moved in organized groups, their military training evident in their disciplined retreat. The insectoid Nephrim buzzed anxiously as they tried to coordinate their response using their natural hive mind communication. But Hana wasn't running. Instead, she pulled out a small communication device that Kethvar had never seen before. It looked like standard Academy equipment, but when she activated it, the display showed symbols and readouts that were definitely not part of the normal curriculum. Phoenix Protocol is now active, she spoke into the device. All assets respond immediately. Target priority alpha. The response came back within seconds, but not from the device. Instead, it came from other human students throughout the Academy who had seemed perfectly ordinary just moments before. As Kethvar watched in amazement, dozens of humans across The facility began moving with the same fluid precision that Hana had demonstrated during their fight. Park Ji-won, a quiet engineering student that Kethvar had barely noticed before, was suddenly dismantling Nexari plasma rifles with his bare hands. The Serpentine soldiers who had breached the Academy's outer perimeter found their advanced weapons falling apart in their grip, as Ji-won exploited weaknesses in their design that shouldn't have been discoverable without years of study. Kim Tae-hyung, who had always seemed like just another average human cadet, began moving through the battlefield at speeds that left actual afterimages in his wake. Nexari soldiers would aim at where he had been a split second before, only to find themselves being struck from 3 different directions simultaneously. His enhanced reflexes made him appear to be in multiple places at once. Choi Minji, a small, human girl who looked even more fragile than Hana had initially appeared, grabbed a Nexari soldier's plasma cannon and crushed it like it was made of paper. When the Serpentine warrior tried to retreat, she picked him up with one hand and threw him through a reinforced wall. Her enhanced strength made the 8-foot-tall alien look like a child's toy. The tide of battle turned completely within minutes. What should have been a massacre of helpless Academy students became a coordinated counterattack that caught the Nexari forces completely off guard. Every enhanced human seemed to specialize in countering different aspects of the enemy's capabilities. Some focused on their technology, others exploited their biological weaknesses, and still others used tactical knowledge that shouldn't have been available to Academy students. Kethvar found himself fighting alongside Hana as the battle moved through the Academy's corridors. Despite his injuries from their earlier duel, his warrior instincts kicked in as they faced the external threat together, but mostly he found himself watching in awe as humanity's secret guardians demonstrated capabilities that redefined everything. He thought he knew about warfare. "How long have you been preparing for this?" he asked Hana, as they took cover behind an overturned training platform. 50 years, she replied, calmly reloading a plasma rifle she had taken from a fallen Nexari. "Soldier, we knew eventually someone would test humanity's defenses. Better to be ready than sorry." The last Nexari soldiers fell within an hour of the attack beginning. Their superior technology and numerical advantage had meant nothing against opponents, who had been specifically designed to counter their exact strengths. As the emergency lights finally stopped flashing and the Academy's normal systems came back online, Kethvar looked around at the aftermath of the battle. The human students were already helping with cleanup and medical assistance, their enhanced abilities making them incredibly efficient at both tasks. To any outside observer, they would appear to be ordinary Academy cadets who had gotten lucky during a surprise attack. Kethvar made a decision that surprised even himself. He turned to Hana, his pride completely set aside for the first time in his adult life. "Teach me," he said simply. "I wish to learn your ways." Hana's smile was the first completely genuine expression he had seen from her since they met. "Welcome." "To the real Academy, Master Kethvar. Class begins now."